We're going to get started. I think we have a quorum. Here comes Jim. I believe we do have a quorum.
All right.
Hi, Jim, nice to see you. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Supervisor Mashburn as our chair, and I think Sandy can probably bang the gavel as our vice chair.
The only person you'll have to probably hit with that is Campbell. I'm just saying. Anyway, well, thank you everybody for coming in this morning. And the meeting is ready to kick off. So we'll just start with a roll call. If we could ask for a roll call on introductions.
Supervisor Mashburn.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Mashburn. Matsumoto. Here. Mitchell.
This is Supervisor Diane Burgess as her alternate.
Okay. Burgess here.
Here.
Supervisor Miller.
Here.
Sorry. Natoli.
He's on his way in traffic, but he will be here.
Okay. Sorry, Supervisor Provenza.
Here.
Gail Miller. TOF.
I'm here.
Hi,
I
Gail.
am not on camera. Sorry. Hi.
Say hi. Brian. Ash.
Here.
And Dolly.
Present.
I'm sorry. Board Member Sandoval.
Still present.
Board Member Wintermitz is not here. We do have a quorum.
Do want to recognize Wes Vaughn with Senator Dodd's office. Thank you for being here. I believe Assemblyman Grayson is on the phone. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
And then we have a couple liaison advisors. I see Jim Waters from the Sassoon RCD.
Good morning, everybody.
And
Morning.
Marge Kohler. Here. Anybody else? Liaison advisors? Right. I just want to make a couple quick announcements. As promised, we are virtual or hybrid today. It's great capability, flexibility. I want to thank Hope and other staff for getting us set up this way. It was not an easy task, but it will serve us well in the future. Just also want to note that obviously we will be doing a site visit today, so very excited to take you all out to 2 Delta project sites for the Conservancy. First time in 2 years. We've got lots to share now, so it's a nice opportunity. But also because of that, we will forego our standard updates from the Eco Restore Program, the Stewardship Council, and the Delta Protection Commission, so you won't see those on the agenda. Right, Supervisor Mashburn, we're ready.
All right, thank you, sir. Next up would be our public comment. So if there are any members of the public there who would like to make a comment to this board that's not related to an item on the agenda. I don't see any hands raised.
Nothing in the room, so.
Okay. All right, thank you, sir. Well, the next item would be an action item, which is the consent calendar. Are there any items that any member of this board would like to pull from the consent calendar for further discussion, or members of the public might want to pull for further discussion? Seeing none. Are there any public comments on the consent calendar? And I see no hands raised. Okay. All right. Well, then I would take a motion on the calendar.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed?
You need to roll.
I think we have to do a roll call because we're talking.
Oh, roll call. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, Mashburn,
Aye.
Matsumoto. Abstain. Natoli. Catherine Miller.
Yes.
Provenza.
Aye.
Gail Miller.
Hi.
Board Member Cash.
Aye.
And Board Member Sandoval.
Yes.
Let's see what you got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're good. We have 6. We need 6.
Mrs. Burgess,
I'm so sorry, Burgess.
do I need to recuse myself since I wasn't at the meeting?
You can abstain.
Okay, I'll abstain.
Thank you. 6. And I'm sorry, I will get on board here. We still have 6. The motion carries.
All right, thank you. So next up is our executive officers report. Campbell, you're up.
Great. Good morning again, everyone. We're going to start with some goodbyes, sort of a sad occasion. We will actually be losing 4 of our board members here in the near term. For those of you that have read ahead in the packet, you will know that we will be having a November board meeting, a quick one, but if not for that, this would be the last board meeting for Dolly Sandoval, public appointed member, governor's appointee. Dolly has served 2 4-year terms, which is the maximum allowable under our enabling legislation. And then Supervisor Kathy Miller from San Joaquin County, Supervisor Karen Mitchoff from Contra Costa County, and Supervisor Don Natoli from Sacramento County will all be retiring at the end of this term. So I just want to say personally,
I'm sorry, I was telling Dolly, I still think of her as a new.
oh, I do too. I do too. I was afraid you were saying you were retiring too. But I just want to say really heartfelt thanks to all 4 of these board members who have been with the Conservancy for the long term. And really what the Conservancy has become, who we are, and I think we're all very proud of what the Conservancy is and what we've accomplished, is due in large part to the board members and active engagement and participating and helping and advising as we've gone through the process. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We do have small tokens of our appreciation. There's kind of just the right time.
Morning, Don.
Thank you. Don, we were just saying goodbye to you.
Well, good morning.
To you, Dolly, Kathy, and Karen. So just deep appreciation for all your participation and attention and dedication to Delta Conservancy. And we hope the county will send us good replacements very soon. But we do just have certificates of appreciation, and we'll get these to those that are on the phone. Just one for Dolly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dawn. Thank you. And again, from my perspective and from the staff's, again, thank you for all that you've done.
I feel sort of like a new board member too still. When Jim and I sat down all those many moons ago to figure out what the guidelines are, first of all, for Prop 1 funding, right? And all those iterations. And it's been a long, it's been a fun time for me. Like I've learned more about the Delta in the last 8 years and the importance of it than I ever had imagined. And so I appreciate John Laird touching base with me 8 years ago and suggesting I apply and then helping me through the process. So it's been really fun to see this office evolve and especially the responsibility really grow. So yeah, congratulations, Campbell.
Saying bye to you.
And I would just say certainly to Dolly and to Kathy and to Karen, who I've had a chance to work with in different realms, but certainly in this realm and Conservancy, its mission and certainly the good work that goes on here again has obviously benefited the Delta in many ways, certainly environmental stewardship, but also with regards the activities that constitute daily life in the Delta. And for all the challenges, the investment that's been made through obviously voter approved measures, but certainly the work of this, the staff, Campbell and all the folks that have, preceded, folks here, but also the current staff. And I just want to say it's been a real pleasure having worked with folks and certainly my colleagues in this body and many who I have known for many years and have seen obviously even in their respective careers advance to the work here at the Conservancy. But I think the unique makeup of this body, certainly the Delta Protection Commission, the Delta Stewardship Council, we can bring together elected officials, but state representatives and people with a great deal of expertise has benefited the Delta. So I've been very pleased. Certainly, have really found it very fulfilling to work with this body and with my colleagues and certainly with all of you. And so thanks for your good work. I know you'll carry that on, and I'll continue to have an interest in the Delta. I tell folks that even though I'm retiring, I'm going to keep a couple of coats and ties, because there will be hearings from time to time that will be certainly reflect upon the Delta, and I look forward to certainly continuing to weigh in from time to time. But I want to wish you all well in your ongoing work, and it's been a real pleasure having the opportunity.
Don, I don't think I've ever seen you without a coat.
After January, you may, so.
Yeah. I would just like to echo my colleagues. It's been such a pleasure working with you, Campbell, and with the staff and with everyone else. You know, when I first got the assignment to represent San Joaquin County on the Conservancy Board, you know, I was told, well, it's a really light assignment. There's never any money for the Conservancy. And so there's just really not much going on there. And so, boy, how things have changed, right? I mean, it flipped a 180, and the work with this group has been really challenging and very exciting to see these new projects come forward, and just the whole direction, the policy direction for the Conservancy. It's really evolved and it's grown, and Campbell, that's in large part due to your leadership as well. I mean, it isn't just the board. We can only do so much without strong leadership, and for staff, policy doesn't get implemented. And so it's really been a pleasure working with all of you, and I'm really proud of our work, and I'm really proud of all the things we have accomplished to benefit the Delta.
Great.
And I'm not saving any coats and ties. Sorry.
Good for you. All right, thank you all very much. So moving on in the executive officer report, I want to start with the staffing update. So I have the pleasure to announce that we were able to promote Brenda Lusk into a newly created position, our administrative manager position, and SSM2, and then subsequently backfill her position with Jessica Adele in an SSM1 position. So both of these individuals have done amazing work for the Conservancy, shown great dedication, and it's just wonderful to be able to move them up a rung, and just great for the organization, great for them, creates some continuity, makes sure that we'll keep them around a little bit longer. And then fortunately, they're both around to help train their successors, which is wonderful too. So yeah, very much appreciate them. And technically, they both applied for the positions and were the best candidates and were hired into those positions. But you know, it's also nice to say that we were promoted.
Thank you so much.
So that's fantastic. We continue to fill a number of other positions. I would actually hope that we might be able to introduce a few of those folks to you today, but the wheels of HR can move slowly sometimes. So hopefully at our next board meeting, we will be able to do that. Okay, so I'm going to zip through the other updates, and please feel free to ask any questions. Just COVID-19 update, really, we continue to do teleworking 2 days a month. That seems to be working quite well for us. It gives us some face time, but also we're clearly equally as effective off-site. The climate resilience, community access, natural resource protection, and nature-based solutions funding came through. We were very, very fortunate, in part due to the support from the administration, the Resources Agency, and the legislature to receive $42 million, a little over $42 million in the final budget process. That's $6.1 million for local assistance and programs for climate resilience, community access, and natural resource protection, and then $36 million for the same purposes for nature-based solutions funding. So that is really exciting. The funding to be able to do the work that we've been doing on subsidence and carbon issues. And on agenda item 10, I'm going to talk more extensively about how we'll be directing those funds. You may know that the governor had an executive order on equity and inclusion, and the Natural Resource Agency has asked all of the agencies to develop an equity plan Karen has taken on that effort, and I think we submitted it today or tomorrow. Tomorrow's the day we submit it. But ultimately, the goal there is to ensure that we, in considering equity issues in everything we do internally and externally. As you may remember, we've had a JEDI committee in the past focusing on this issue. So it's a real opportunity to really think through how do we make sure that we're meeting the needs of all the communities that we serve in a methodical way, and really appreciate Karen's taking that on and delivering that plan, and we will continue to work on it. Nutria eradication numbers are in attachment 2. I think the good news there is we continue to prevent an exponential increase in population. In fact, we're actually having a very positive effect at controlling the population. So that's a very good thing. Quickly on fish-friendly farming, we've reported on that a number of times. We have enrolled over 10,000 acres. I think our target was 10,000 acres. And those projects are now starting to be implemented. For Delta Science Coordination, I think the key note there is that the Restoration Subcommittee continues to meet. We actually are meeting again middle of this month. And the committee endorsed a work plan at their last meeting. And then we also continue to plan the Restoration Subcommittee Forum, which for the spring, which will be a place where we bring the Delta community, as well as the practitioners and the agency representatives all together to talk about restoration. The key topic of that meeting is going to be the newly approved Chapter 4 of the Delta Plan, which is the Ecosystem Restoration Chapter. And we'll have a very detailed discussion of what those targets are and how we would expect to achieve those targets collectively through time. Moving on to media mentions, there were 2. Thank you to Les Vaughn and Senator Dodd's staff. We collaborated and got a Senate resolution that recognizes Delta Week, not just this year, but every year at the end of September, which is fantastic. Hopefully in future years, we'll coordinate that with more Delta cleanups and more outreach activities. But there was a nice local write-up with Senator Dodd and the declaration. And then I actually was interviewed for my Ag Life Daily on the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program. And that was a fun little interview. And we're going to talk a lot more about the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program later on in the agenda. So board directives from the last meeting, the July meeting, just first that we would provide policy update and on the recording landowner access agreements for grants. See 2 agenda items. We'll revisit the one project that's needs approved, and we'll look at a process and criteria for which we might want to provide those waivers under agenda item 8. And then also we were asked to provide an update on the drought response program, which we'll do under agenda item 10. So that's the program part of the executive officer's report. Any questions on that?
Just a quick question, if I could, just on the nutrient report, Campbell, in the chart, the number, I guess, the grand total on the average number of nutrient taken per cell. How did you get to 8.4 when all the rest of the numbers were something less than that for all the ensuing years or the previous years?
I am probably not going to be able to answer that question.
I read the chart in here, and I think it's good news here. I just was curious, how do you get to an average 8.4 when you only have any 8s in the whole?
So Don, the numbers are provided by CDFW. I can check on that, make sure I did it correctly.
Well, it looks a little inflated, I guess, if you follow the chart. So, okay, again, I mean,
I know that I've asked about one of them before, and there was a, but perhaps I did it incorrectly, but I don't think so. I think Valerie would actually answer that for us.
You see what I'm asking about them?
I do see what you're asking about, and I have asked that before, but it's something about it's a unique number.
Yeah, so if you divide the number of nutria taken by the total cells, that's the 8.3 number.
Thank you. Yeah, it's different. It doesn't exactly add up because it's something about a unique cell.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks. I just finally got to it on my staff.
Yeah,
report.
yeah, no,
What
okay.
we're talking about. Okay.
So it's a unique way of doing math. Is that what that is?
I asked her the same thing once.
Yeah, we'll try to get a
Don't worry, I won't be here in January, so however, whatever the numbers are, then it's a good trend though, so. Okay.
It is the math, though.
Yeah.
It is the math.
It is something about it. I'll try and get a footnote on it for next
I
time.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I will turn it over to Jessica for the budget expenditure update.
Excellent. So, agenda item 5.3 is our budget expenditure report. It's expenditures just through July and August. Those are the reports that I had so far. We are in line with current expenditures for 2 months. You'll see our number on line 26. Our budget is significantly larger than it has been. You know, our total with grants is 67,872,000. We have a lot to do. I don't have anything that's jumped out at me on this budget. It's very early in the year. Any questions?
All right, well, then that concludes the executive officer's report. Thank you all very much.
All right.
Thank you, Campbell. Next up is our ecosystem restoration and climate adaptation grant program update with Dr. Fox.
Dr. Fox just walked out of the room.
Just walked out of the room.
I think he thought he had another minute or two. Why don't we go ahead and reverse order, and we'll start with the community enhancement grant program.
That'd be great.
Martha, do you want to?
It's fine.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. It's mine.
Put your name tag.
There we go. All right. Good morning, board members. My name is Maya Garrett, and I'm the Conservancy's Ecological and Community Program Analyst. I'm here to present Agenda Item 7, the Community Enhancement Program Update, which is on page 31 of your agenda packet. Trevor is going to go a little more into detail about this since we reversed our order, but we have a new table in our report today, and it's going to showcase the different funding sources supporting the Community Enhancement Program, including an additional $6.1 million in new community access and restoration funding. And Trevor will have a little more detail on that, as I said. Additionally, this report highlights the projects funded through Proposition 68 and CAR program funds. I'm happy to report that we have 10 executed grants. The projects are detailed on pages 32 through 35 of the agenda packet, but to provide a highlight, P6808, the Freeport Gateway Monuments Project, was executed on September 21st, and Conservancy staff went on a site visit earlier this month with Sacramento County staff and members of the Freeport citizens community. In addition to these projects, we have one working proposal, project ID P6814, the Delta Aquatic Center of Stockton, a planning grant with the Community Foundation of San Joaquin. Details about the proposal can be found on page 35 of your agenda packet. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions there, and we have Dr. Fox back, so.
So thought you had another minute.
Good morning, board members. I'm Trevor Fox, an environmental scientist with the Conservancy. It is my pleasure to present to you agenda item number 6, which is on page 16 of your board packet, the ecosystem restoration and climate adaptation update. Before I give an update on existing Prop 1 projects, I'd like to note that we have renamed the Proposition 1 grant program update to the Ecosystem Restoration and Climate Change Program, Climate Adaptation Grant Program, which we have nicknamed ERICA. And from here on out, we will use ERICA, ERCA, to reference the Proposition 1 funded projects and other projects that support the ecosystem restoration and climate adaptation. As Campbell referenced in the executive officer report, agenda item number 5, and he will discuss in more detail in agenda item number 10, the Conservancy received a general fund allocation of over $41 million to support projects that fulfill the Conservancy's mission. In line with the naming convention change and to reflect the new funding sources, we've created a table that showcases the different funding sources that support projects in the ERICA program. Some of the funding sources, for example, climate access and restoration, bridge both ERICA and the Community Enhancement Program, agenda item 7. This table will allow us to track funding sources and communicate updates now and into the future as we implement these new funding sources. Now for an update on the ERICA projects. For active projects, we've provided the complete program update in the board materials. Please refer to the new information row for specific project details. One update to note is that project ID 1702, restoration planning at River Garden Farms, received a statutory exemption for restoration projects and was awarded funding for implementation by the Wildlife Conservation Board. This implementation funding is for one of the sites in the planning project funded by the Conservancy. Now on to our closed projects. Since the last board meeting, we've had 3 additional projects fully close out for a total of 12 closed projects. These projects are Project ID 1503, Yellow Bypass Wildlife Habitat and Drainage Improvement Project, Project ID 1509, Three Creeks Parkway Restoration, and P1 1602, the Dutch Slough Tidal Marsh Restoration. Per our standard practice, all of these final reports are available upon request. Moving on to the projects previously awarded at the last board meeting. Since the last board meeting, we have drafted all 6 grant agreements, and we are actively working with the awardees to complete internal reviews for the grant agreements. We anticipate to have these grants executed in the late fall 2022 and early winter 2023. Finally, today I will be presenting for recommendation of award Prop 12208, the Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project, and that will be agenda item number 9. If there are any questions at this time, I'd be happy to answer them.
Just excited about renaming the program and being able to show all the funding sources, but also we really want to thank staff for their hard work. Getting those 6 grant agreements out in the process. It's a lot of work, a lot of back and forth with the applicants and legal and administrative review. So it's been a great process and they really stepped it up and moved them quickly. So thank you.
I had a question. On the general fund appropriations, do we have a timeline for when those will go out?
When they will go out, if you mean, we'll liquidate all the funding?
No, when we'll have projects aligned or ready to award or?
Yeah, so we
what the
have,
process
so
is
the
for doing
first tranche of CAR funding that we got last year, it's almost all completely obligated. The next setup, we're going to talk about the solicitation package going out in November.
Okay.
We've been working on projects. It's going to be a stretch to move that money quickly, but I think we can get it done.
Okay.
And we're also looking to try to leverage that money with private and philanthropic funding.
Supervisor Burgess has introduced.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to recognize the Three Creeks project. It's a project that I worked on when I was executive director of Friends of Marsh Creek and worked with the Contra Costa County Flood Control District and American Rivers on it. And recently, the ex-director of flood control for Contra Costa, Mike Carlson, passed away. And I just wanted to just note in the record that what a difference he made in this world, contributing to habitat restoration along with flood control. And then I also wanted to make the point that, you know, there's all these projects that happen, but there's different projects that have been funded through the Conservancy, and there is a domino effect. And so this one project may get accomplished, but it's also creating more projects. And so to measure it just by one project is probably not as valuable as realizing that we're making a huge difference because there's a lot more projects happening. And, you know, we're in the business of getting through this meeting, but like you're making a significant difference. And for those that are leaving, I just wanted to leave that with you.
Thank you very much. Very nice.
Focusing on
So thank you for putting this table with the sources of funding on here too. That's a great ad. And it's just good news is there's a lot of different sources. One clarification. So I'm just wondering how you're feeling about staffing with all of this additional work to be done. And then whether I'm understanding correctly, the difference between the total allocation and the minimum available for grants would be potentially funding that could go to investments within the Conservancy for staffing and that, am I understanding that?
Yes, you are understanding that. The total allocation and then minimum amount is the difference there is what is available for admin for Conservancy. We did not get any additional permanent positions, but we can hire temporary positions into what's called the blanket. And so that it will be using the delta between the, the available and for the administration to actually hire the staff to be able to do the work. So one of the associate government program analysts that we're hiring will actually replace Hope's excellent work and support the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program. We're looking at hiring a senior scientist to support the nature-based solutions package. So it's not ideal. I don't think we'll ever have enough staff, but I think we've got the solicitations in place right now to bring on the staff that we need to do effectively.
We're also in the process of hiring another analyst in the admin section.
Right.
So.
Supervisor Natoli, did you have a question?
No, actually, it was back to the community enhancement program. I just wanted to note that last Thursday, there was a rededication for the Bing Kong Tong building in Isleton. And Isleton Museum is now open. And I know the grant, the most recent grant from the Conservancy, I think those cases are in order. But if folks have time, sometime in the future here in Isleton, the hours are, aren't real long in the days that they're open. But it really is a very excellent portrayal of, the settlement and the contributions of a variety of immigrants to the reclamation, certainly of the swamplands, but the agricultural and certainly, as you say again, daily life kind of recorded, and certainly the history of in Kong Tong society. And anyway, I just wanted to note that, and those display cases will be a wonderful addition. I mean, you go in there now, and it was pretty spectacular the way they've arranged their displays and the information. But it's a tremendous resource too, I think, for folks that are wanting to learn more about Delta history and culture and contributions of different folks and segments of our population over time. So I just wanted to note that. I know that they've mentioned that their new cases were on, I think, on order, but I hesitated to do that. To note that, I wanted to.
That's great. I appreciate that. I saw that article in the paper and was really excited to see that. And just to also note that immediately next door to the Bing Kong building, Asian American Heritage Park,
Yes,
that we have funded, that will be, a nice neighbor to further the historic significance of it all. So that's great. All right. Anything else?
Yes, on the Black Rock restoration, this conclusion date of November 1st, coming right up. Is that still happening?
Yes, they are on target. Sarah Lesmeister, Ecological and Community Programs Manager here at the Conservancy. They are on target. They've actually finished their on the groundwork, and they're just moving their draft by order right now.
Great.
So they are on target.
And they're studying ways of controlling invasive species. Will we get that report back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay. It's always good to see one finish.
Yes, absolutely.
All of these take so long.
They've been wonderful, the grantee and the project being on time. Great project.
Thank you.
Did you want to add something?
I also just wanted to share that we're planning to have a report out on that project, the Phragmites Control Study, at the Delta Interagency Invasive Species Coordination Team meeting in the first quarter of next year. So I can make sure that announcement goes out to the board members if they want to tune in to hear the short talk summary of that.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, Supervisor, I think that concludes this item.
All right. Well, that was a lot of good comment on a lot of good stuff. Our 8th item today is consideration of the process and criteria for waiving and recording of landowner access agreements for conservancy agreements. I think, Doc, you're up.
There we go. Okay. So good morning, board members. My name is Sarah Lesmeister, and like I just said, I'm the Ecological and Community Programs Manager here at the Delta Conservancy. Today, I bring before you a proposed process and criteria for waiving the recording of landowner access agreements. This is agenda item 8, starting on page 38 of the board packet.
For some context, at the last board meeting, there was a request from a Proposition 1 Cycle 5 applicant and landowner to waive the requirement to record a landowner access agreement against the deed of the property. During that discussion, Conservancy staff were asked to bring before the board a set of criteria to evaluate waiver requests, a process, and identify the risk to the Conservancy if waivers were granted. This agenda item addresses that request from the board. So for some background, through conversations we've had with applicants across programs here at the Conservancy, there have been reluctance from landowners to record landowner access agreements against the deed of the property. As a result of these conversations, Conservancy staff researched existing policies across several natural resource agency or departments within the state. From that research, staff determined that the requirements have varied greatly, ranging from no requirements at all to a case-by-case determination by staff whether or not to waive the landowner access agreement requirements. Additionally, staff did an assessment. Additionally, Conservancy staff did an assessment of our existing projects that require a landowner access agreement and determined that waivers have been allowed in the past, but only in well-justified scenarios. Currently, the Conservancy does not have an established process or criteria for evaluating or for waiving the requirement of recording a landowner access agreement. So as we go to risk, the primary risk to the Conservancy in waiving the requirement to record a landowner access agreement is that it will allocate funds for a project that, if a change in land ownership were to occur, could undermine or impede the implementation and retention of that project over time. However, there are potential benefits in waiving the recording requirement, including increased opportunity for projects on private lands in the Delta, a demonstrated willingness by the Conservancy to work with hesitant landowners, and reducing the barrier to access state funding opportunities for landowners. So given that, what are the existing requirements? So what is our current process here at the Conservancy? Well, here at the Conservancy, we require adequate site control for all of our projects. Demonstration of the site control varies on project types, whether it's a planning grant, an implementation grant, or an acquisition project. And also varies on ownership type, if the grantee is the owner or if it's a private landowner or state's an owner. So for planning grants, where the grantee is not a landowner, we require the grantee and the landowner to sign a landowner access agreement and have that on file with us. That document is not recorded against the deed of the property at all. So for implementation projects where the grantee does not own the land on which the project is being implemented, we require that the landowner access agreement between the grantee and the property owner be executed and recorded against the property with the county prior to dispersing funds. And then for implementation grants where the grantee owns the land on which the project is being implemented, the grantee must record what is called a notice of an unrecorded grant agreement. It's still recorded, but says not, so it's kind of confusing, which is often called NUGA.
And one quick clarification, I think you said that the planning grants, we do something recorded, but it's just a letter of support.
Yes, just a letter of support, yes.
Make sure that, I might have misheard that, but I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, but it's not recorded against the deed, it's just
Correct.
on file with us.
Correct.
Yep. So a landowner access agreement and a NUGA, so notice of unrecorded grant agreement, are similar that when they are recorded, they both provide constructive notice to subsequent owners or other interested parties of an encumbrance or grant agreement affecting the underlying land. And as such, subsequent owners or other parties that acquire interest in that land will be legally bound to abide by and not interfere with the terms of the grant agreement. So given this information, we have developed a process that incorporates feedback from the applicants and grantees and is in alignment with other natural resource agencies and departments and minimizes the risk to the Conservancy and provides legal protection that we need to be good stewards of state funds. So with that, I'm going to go into our proposed or recommended process. So the proposed process that we would follow is outlined in agenda item 8.2 on page 41 of the board packet. But briefly, there are 4 steps. First, the applicant and the landowner would submit a written request to the Conservancy to waive the landowner access agreement requirement. And then second, the Conservancy staff would evaluate the request using the evaluation criteria, which is outlined on agenda item 8.2. And then the Conservancy staff, or we would come to the board with an analysis of that waiver request for the board to consider approving or not. And then finally, if the board has approved the waiver request, the grantee would still be required to sign a landowner access agreement or a site access agreement with us, and we would keep that on file, similar to like a planning grant. So the proposed criteria that we propose to use for evaluating a waiver request, there are 9 of them on that agenda item 8.2, which is on page 41. So briefly, the criteria evaluate whether the landowner has incentive to retain or remove the project. We evaluate the land development potential, and then the landowner's collaboration and participation with public entities or conservation projects, currently on the property, and more. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or address any comments at this point.
Could you give an example of a situation where we might need access, the situation where the landowner is not the project applicant, where we might need access to the land? Future.
Yeah, so one example where the Conservancy or the state may need access is to do every 3 years, we do a site visit to assess, after the funding term, to assess how well the project is still going, right? If there are any major issues, if it's still a good use of state funds. So every 3 years, we as state employees or, stewards of those funds go out and do site visits there. So that's an example of where we would want to do that after the project's been implemented and the funding has closed.
And if I may, the landowner access agreement that we require now is between the grantee and the property owner. So it's the Conservancy's rights to access the property actually flow through the grant agreement itself. The landowner access agreement is to ensure that the implementer of the project gets to access the property going forward.
So it's really a case-by-case determination as to.
That's the proposal would be case by case. Based on this series of criteria that are intended to reduce the risk of the property owner failing and selling the property, and then that new person blocking the project from continuing basically.
It's kind of a tough choice.
It's a tough choice, yes. And so right now the process is just to require it primarily. There have been a few times where the Conservancy has provided an exception, but it's been more ad hoc. And so this is to sort of organize the process and make sure it's consistent going forward. But yeah, I think still the default would be a preference for a recorded agreement. But there are situations where landowners require flexibility and it's a choice between the project maybe not happening versus accepting some risk.
And that is our next agenda item, is the one that we discussed at the last board meeting. But for this issue, we didn't approve the project. So it's a landowner it's a great project, minimal risk, but they're just not willing to record the deed. And we're finding that more often out in the Delta.
And it's not unique to the Delta. This is a problem all over. A lot of landowners are reluctant to record things against their deed.
Yeah, that's understandable. Campbell, do you feel it might put too much pressure on the Conservancy to have that out there and everyone coming in asking for a waiver? Or is it something that you sent the message, it's going to be very judiciously used? No, probably won't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think our grant guidelines will still indicate the need for a landowner access agreement that is recorded in these circumstances. And then it's just something that we would evaluate if we have reluctant landowners on a case by case. Certainly not something we want to telegraph out there.
Right.
Okay. Right. It's the guarantee, say I build a project on, someone comes in and builds a project on my land and then I sell it. What's the guarantee that that project's going to continue through the lifeline of the project, the number of years that were stipulated in the grant agreement? Right now you have the landowner access where you can come in and you can actually see that it's done. What's the guarantee if this happens, if it's sold? And
So I think that's part of the evaluation. The evaluation criteria is, based on my understanding, I don't want to misspeak here, Nicole, but I think we would lose that guarantee by not recording against the deed. And so there would be some of that risk there. But however, we evaluate that risk if we are willing to go into an agreement with a grantee or, you know, an applicant and the landowner. We would say, what is the likelihood of that property being sold? What is that likelihood of that property being developed? What is the likelihood of that project being removed? And those are all the things that we would ask the board to consider when they decide to grant that waiver request or not.
It is accepting some risk.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, evaluating it and collectively agreeing that it's worth.
Just as a follow-up, in the grant agreement, does it stipulate that if the property is transferred to another owner, that the project needs to continue, or the upkeep of the project needs to continue, the asset that we're buying from the state needs to continue? Okay,
Yeah, so there is still some potential for enforcement of the grant terms, but
that's all I was looking for.
yeah, it's just a little bit, it's not as clear. The path wouldn't be as clear without the grant,
Okay.
but it's still possible.
And just to follow up on Brian's question, when you say, Nicole, it would still be recorded here in our offices.
Right.
So how would a landowner notify, I mean, the best landowners would say, call the Conservancy and say, guess what, Sarah, we're selling, and here's this awesome person who's gonna buy it and they want to continue and even extend the project, right? The not best landowner would not tell you they're selling. So how do we even know if somebody's selling a piece of property?
So as part of this, and I believe I put it in the staff report here, we have updated our set of grant guidelines and then also our grant agreement and the landowner access agreement that says that we would require at least 10 business days of written notice of the land being sold or transferred.
Okay, I missed that. Thank you.
No, and then I didn't go over that too much on here, but yes, that
Okay.
is something we've added to, right, increase that communication, that documentation, and really allow us, the Conservancy, opportunity to speak with the current landowner and potential future landowner about the project, its value.
Excellent.
And provide notice to them.
Right.
Necessary. Make sure they know that this is there and happening, so.
Good, thank you.
I have a question, if I can, or something else.
Sandy's been waiting
Okay,
for
well,
them to
do,
get-
do any of the other agencies look at the dollar value of the grant itself? To kind of, as right, because risk obviously goes up with dollar value, but is that a consideration that anyone else is using, or did you guys talk about that at all?
In the research that I saw and heard, or, you know, went over, I didn't see anything explicitly about dollar amount that came up. However, I think that is a fair thing to assess as part of the criteria, and it might have been, what is it called, the term, assumed, right? Just that use, I don't know, what's terminology, but, yes, I think, it didn't come up in conversation, but I think it is an important factor to consider in the risk.
And I think it could be something that could be expressly added, if the board wanted to add it to the list of criteria.
In doing so, would we have to think through what are our thresholds? Or could we be vague enough to just say, consider the total amount?
I think,
Okay.
yeah, the latter.
Good.
And that same line, I just wondered if you have different lengths of requirements for your deed restrictions. Is it only 15 years, or do you have some that are in perpetuity, or 5 years, or, and maybe the length of the deed restriction should be in a criteria. You know, the longer the deed restriction, the more risk you would take. If it's a short one, they're not going to sell in 5 years. It depends.
Currently, the deed restriction of the projects are for 15 years after the funding term ends.
Yeah.
That's kind of the Conservancy standard because of bonds. However, we could in the future have ones or, agreements that expand upon that go longer. So maybe adding some sort of length of deed or the potential impacts to the consideration.
Yeah, I mean, my hesitation, the reason I kind of did this little shake of my head was because since the standard requirement right now is for projects to exist for 15 years, I would hate to imply that there's flexibility there. Right, because that arises from the requirements for capital assets and to ensure that the use of state funds is for a certain length of time. I think it would be unlikely that the funding sources would change such that we would be doing something shorter.
But longer is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, and longer might, that's an interesting suggestion. I think the only thing I can think of where that would occur would be where there's an ownership, where the Conservancy might require an ownership interest. But I think then the Conservancy might be the owner, or it might be.
Happy to record a new guy. We have no problems. Other questions or concerns? I think you
I
had some
don't see any
recommended.
hands raised.
Sure, so we're good with questions and comments at this time. I do have some suggested motion language. I can read that out loud if you all would like. Head nods, great. So move that the board approve the processing criteria for waiving the recording of landowner access agreements for Conservancy agreements as presented in this agenda item.
And did you want to include the amendment? Is there a desire to include Sandy's suggested additional criteria?
Yes. So including additional criteria regarding total amount.
Do I need to reread it?
I've added that to the.
Thank you. So moved.
Second.
Got a
So we
motion
have,
and a second.
And I'm sorry, Brian, was that you?
It was Dawn. Dawn.
Don, sorry. Okay. Okay. Chair Mashburn,
Aye. Aye.
Vice Chair Matsumoto,
Yes.
Natoli,
Aye.
Burgess.
Aye.
Sorry, you're over there, I know. Catherine Miller.
Yes.
We have two Millers, so I always have to get your first name in there. Provenza.
Aye.
Gail Miller.
Aye.
Board Member Cash
Aye.
and Board Member Sandoval.
Aye.
Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 ayes. The motion carries.
All right. That brings us to our next, which is the consideration of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, responsible agency findings and award of a Proposition 1 Ecosystem Restoration and Climate Adaptation Program grant for the Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project. Dr. Fox, sir.
Thank you. Good morning again. In follow-up from the Ecosystem Restoration and Climate Adaptation Program update, I'm pleased to present the CEQA responsible agency findings and recommendation of award of Proposition 1 Ecosystem Restoration and Climate Program funds for the Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project. Just for some context, this item can be found on page 42 of your agenda packet. And as a reminder, we brought this staff recommendation before the board at our last meeting in July. However, the applicant in the landowner's request to waive requirement to record the landowner access agreement required additional work that Sarah outlined in the previous item, agenda item number 8. We will go over the landowner access agreement waiver evaluation criteria in the additional consideration section. This implementation project proposal, project ID 2208, titled Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project, located in Solano County, has been proposed by the Solano County Resource Conservation District. Conservancy staff recommend that the board approve up to $359,639 in grant funding for this proposal. And in summary, the proposed project will generate 20 acres of woodland riparian habitat by planting over 1,180 native trees and shrubs, 100 pounds of wildflower seeds, 25,000 forb sedge plugs along the northern bank of the Ulatis Creek in Solano County. And further, invasive plants such as the giant reed, Arundo donax, will be controlled throughout the project site. The 20-acre project site will provide valuable wildlife habitat by generating riparian habitat and protective shade, secure nesting habitats, and showcase effective conservation efforts on working lands. The planning phase of the project was previously funded in part by the Delta Conservancy, and that would be project ID 1804. For cost share, the total cost share is 20% of the budget. with additional funds coming from several sources, including the applicant, the landowner, a federal grant, and a nonprofit organization. This project is consistent with the specific actions and priorities identified in the Proposition 1 CA Water Action Plan, the Conservancy's governing statute, and the Conservancy's 2022 to 2027 strategic plan. For local support, the proposal does demonstrate local support and includes a resolution from the project's County Board of Supervisors. The applicant provided letters of support from all cost sharing and leveraging partners while developing close relationships with the various stakeholders outlined in the staff report, the staff recommendation. Prior to submitting their proposal, the applicant shared reluctance from the landowner to record the landowner access agreement against the deed of the property and submitted a request to waive the recording of the landowner access agreement. Based on the process and criteria covered in agenda item number 8, the Conservancy staff evaluated and responded to the 9 criteria that is detailed on page 45 and 46 of the board packet. Summarize, the landowner has incentive to retain the project. The applicant has a long and successful partnership with the landowner and stated the landowner recently received a Natural Resource Conservation Service Environmental Quality Incentive Program grant, which also requires a 15-year contract. The NRCS grant is for separate conservation-related work, but at the same project site. Additionally, the landowner participates in a carbon farm plan that enables the landowner to be certified climate beneficial wool. The land has been owned by the same family for over 3 generations, and the owners have a long history of supporting conservation efforts. The development potential is minimal due to its location within neighboring agricultural lands. Furthermore, the project itself provides a benefit to the landowner by supporting the carbon farm plan. If the waiver is not granted and the proposal is not funded, the Conservancy and the state misses a valuable opportunity to restore floodplain habitat in the Ulatis Creek area. Given the landowner's longstanding commitment to conservation, their partnership with the applicant and several other public entities, and their corresponding grant from the NRCS, Conservancy staff recommends granting their request. At this time, I'll hand you off to Rachel for the environmental compliance component.
Thanks, Trevor. Good morning, Chair and board members. I'm Rachel Wigginton, a senior environmental scientist with the Conservancy. So the Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project is considered a project under the California Environmental Quality Act. The applicant, the Solano Resource Conservation District, is the lead agency, and the Delta Conservancy as a funder would be a responsible agency. The Solano RCD prepared an initial study and mitigated negative declaration in order to analyze all potential adverse environmental impacts of the project. The initial study found potential significant project impacts on biological resources, cultural resources, and hydrology and water quality. However, it was also determined that all identified impacts could be reduced to less than significant levels through mitigation measures outlined in the initial study and mitigated negative declaration. As a responsible agency for a project that is not exempt from CEQA, the Delta Conservancy Board is required to make independent findings represented by Resolution 2022-01 and submit a notice of determination, which can be found on pages 48 and 50 of the board packet, respectively. Staff have reviewed the documents and findings submitted by the applicant, and staff recommend that the board adopt the resolution making responsible agency findings, concluding that all necessary mitigation measures have been included in the project to eliminate significant effects on the environment. If the board adopts the resolution, the chair will sign the resolution and the notice of determination, which staff will then post to the state clearinghouse and on the Delta Conservancy's webpage.
Thank you, Rachel. So in summary, we are pleased to recommend this project for board approval, noting there's suggested motion language at the bottom of the agenda item for your consideration. Before we proceed, I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Well, if I could, I'd just like to thank staff. This is a wonderful project, and Solano RCD is going to realize a great benefit out there in that's all flat grazing land where there's nothing for the riparians. There's no habitat for them. This is going to create that along that creek, and it's going to help with a lot of the invasive species that we end up with in that creek, because it gets a lot of runoff from the city of Vacaville and other areas. So thank you for this. This is going to be a wonderful project. And I don't see any questions from anybody. So that said, I could take a motion, or I would make a motion if that's allowable.
I'll move.
We have to get through
Wait.
three of them, so I think Trevor will read off the,
Okay,
oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you,
So it's
sir.
like- Jim, did you have a question?
Okay, so I'd like to. I'd like to. With all of that, I'd like to suggest motion language. There are three separate motions that are required, and I'll start with the first. Move to adopt resolution 2022-01, which makes responsible agency findings that all necessary mitigation measures have been included in the Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project. Secondly, move to approve the applicant's request to waive the requirement for recording the executed grant agreement against the deed of the property, conditional upon the Conservancy receiving and approving a landowner access agreement. And finally, move to award funding up to $359,639 to the Solano Resource Conservation District for Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project, conditional upon the applicant receiving a Delta Plan certification of consistency and verification of water rights of the landowner.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Nicole, can we do them all in one?
It would be better to vote on them individually.
Okay.
So the first one was.
All right.
To
I'll
adopt
move
the
the first item.
resolution. So the first one was to adopt the resolution 22-202-01. So the
Moved by
CEQA.
Supervisor Mashburn.
Sorry. Mashburn moving and Sandoval as a second.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a roll call vote on that. So we have, Mashburn,
Aye.
Matsumoto.
Yes.
Natoli,
Aye.
Burgess,
Yes.
Catherine Miller,
Yes.
Provenza,
Yes.
Gail Miller,
Hi.
Cash,
Aye.
and Sandoval.
Yes.
We have 9 ayes, the motion carries. So the next motion is to waive the land access the recording of the land access agreement. Would you like me to read the whole thing, or are we comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with that, and I'll move it if it's okay.
So moved. Is there a second?
I'll second. And I have,
A second. Would you like to comment on it before we vote?
yes,
Okay.
I would be reluctant to do this on a general basis, but I think this one appears to be justified. There's a strong incentive of the landowner to continue the project, and future landowners to continue the project, which is documented in the staff report. You know, specifically, the landowner participates in carbon farm plan, enabling the land's production to be certified climate beneficial wool. Maintenance of that certification is contingent upon continued implementation of the practices that sequester carbon on the ranch. Along with that is very little potential of other development at the site. It's far from areas that are likely to be developed. It's part of a working ranch. Neighboring properties also agricultural. It's likely that a future landowner would continue this use and benefit from continuing the use. So with those factors, I'm happy to second the motion.
Okay. So we have moved by Mashburn, seconded by Provenza. Mashburn,
Aye.
Chair,
Yes.
Vice Chair Matsumoto,
Yes.
and Supervisor Natoli,
Aye.
and Supervisor Burgess.
Yes.
Go. Supervisor Miller
Yes.
and Supervisor Provenza.
Yes.
Board Member Miller.
Yes.
Yep. There you go. And Board Member Cash.
Aye.
And Board Member Sandoval.
Yes.
All right. We have 9 ayes. The motion carries. Final motion is to award funding of $359,639 of Proposition 1 funds to the Solano County Resource Conservation District for the Ulatis Creek Habitat Restoration Project. Do we have a motion?
So move.
He is 3 for 3 on this one.
3 for 3
I'll
on this
second
one.
that. Mrs.
Kathy
Berger?
will second that. Second.
I think that was Diane.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that
Yes.
Diane? I'm sorry. We're gonna give that to Burgess. Kathy, you're gonna have to get one in on your last one. Give that to Burgess, because I don't think I've had a vote from her. And we're gonna take a vote on that. Mashburn,
Aye.
Matsumoto,
Yes.
and Natoli,
I,
and Burgess,
Yes.
Catherine Miller.
Yes.
This is our last one. Provenza.
Aye.
Gail Miller.
Yes.
And Cash.
Aye.
And Sandoval.
Yes.
Okay, 9 ayes, the motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
At this time, I'd like to invite the applicant, I believe is with us, Catherine, to say a few words about the project.
I just want to thank Delta Conservancy board members and staff for being willing to consider an alternative approach here. The Solano Resource Conservation District is really thrilled to be working on this project. And I know the landowner is excited also, so we really welcome this opportunity. And thanks for setting up a new system that will allow private landowners, I think, to feel more comfortable working with the Delta Conservancy. So thank you very, very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we're moving from the action item down to the Delta Drought Response Pilot Program update.
Hey, well, good morning, everyone. Excited to tell you about this year's Delta Drought Response Pilot Program. You will recall that in 2022, we ran a very rapid and very successful program where we enrolled, we had 33 grants enrolling over 8,000 acres with farmers shifting to less water intensive practices, either through less water intensive crop shifting or deficit irrigation or fallowing in general. And then we had one applicant who actually installed a drip tape system as a more conservation oriented irrigation process. As you know, the drought continues, unfortunately, and the Department of Water Resources provided us with $12 million this year to run the program in 2023. So working with the same partners that we worked with last year and the inclusion of the Nature Conservancy, talk a little bit about that. We designed this program and there are really three sort of fundamental differences that I want to hit on. First, we established what we call a reverse auction and clearing price process, where farmers actually bid the practices that they want to be compensated for. Our hope there is that it increased competition and increase the amount of water that we could save for the amount of money that we can put on the landscape out on the Delta. We also set a single deadline, so we got all bids in on November 16th, and we included benefits or incentives to provide habitat for migratory bird benefits. So, up and down the valley, migratory birds are suffering as a result of the drought. There's simply not enough wet habitat out there. So the concept here was that if a project had a net water savings and could provide bird benefits, we would try to incentivize that. So an example, a farmer foregoes 100 acres of corn if they can flood up 30 or 40 acres of that in the spring to 4 inches depth for 2 months. That's still a significant savings over the business as usual corn crop, but it also provides that habitat that's really critically missing in the Delta. So again, this year, all indications are that it was a very successful project. We got over 120 bids and requested just under twice the available amount of funding. So currently, a selection panel is working, and that selection panel is again the same group that met last year. It includes our staff from Department of Water Resources, staff from the Water Master's Office, California Department of Food and Agriculture, the Nature Conservancy, Agricultural Extension, and UC Merced. And we're working with an optimization model that was developed by TNC that allows us to look at all the complexity of 120 bids, group-like practices, set a price that will achieve the greatest amount of water savings as well as expend the budget, but really hone in our key criteria, which are amount of water saved and then geographic distribution. Well, it's still a pilot program, so we still want to make sure that we're covering projects in and around the Delta so we get the most information out of the process. Last year, because we were receiving projects continuously, we had board approval to work with the chair and the vice chair to, on a batch basis, provide applications when the selection committee had made recommendations. So this year,
Stan, yeah, we're getting communication about every other day, I think. You were all working hard, but I know we were getting.
And you all did great, and we really appreciated your rapid turnaround on those. But this year, since they are all batched, and since it is a $10 million grant outlay in general, we wanted to make sure the board was involved and actually approved the selection committee and staff recommendations. So we are then, this is a rapid turnaround. We need to get this out to farmers so that they can make their planting decisions as quickly as possible. So we're hoping to have staff recommendations after the next, or very quickly after our next selection committee meeting. Rapidly package those and get them out. And we would like to hold a special board meeting on November 16th, Wednesday, November 16th. Yeah, we're hoping that this is a single recommendation for the whole package. So we anticipate that it might be a quick board meeting. There'll be one other agenda item on the agenda, which I will talk about in the next agenda item. But we, due to the hopefully short nature of the meeting, we'd just like to do it entirely virtually. So that's the hope and the expectation. Before I turn it over to questions, I just have to say thanks to a lot of people. So first off, thanks to the partners who came together again this year and very rapidly designed a new and complex system. That included the Delta water users, and it was really nothing short of amazing, the level of collaboration and professionalism of everybody coming together. Our staff and agency staff really just went above and beyond, again, with everything in terms of opening the solicitation, processing the bids, working to analyze the bids into the process of packaging up the recommendation to staff. The level of dedication is really off the charts. It's a great program in that it really connects us with Delta growers in ways that we haven't really had before. And it also provides them information that they need. It provides the state information that the state needs. And so overall, I just can't imagine a program that's just more effective and more valuable. And I just want to thank everybody who's been involved, because it really has been a big lift, a lot of complex interactions, and just to really appreciate everybody who's worked on it. So with that, I would open it up for any questions and thoughts.
I'm just psyched about it. I mean, I have a little bit of a bias being involved on the other on the kind of implementation side, but just I appreciate the Delta Conservancy really taking a leadership role on this and being really innovative, because I think it really, one, it's bringing more options to landowners, which will hopefully help increase participation, and it's an opportunity to build education, right? So even if they don't, for example, opt into the bird thing, like they're learning about the bird thing, right? And so it's just an opportunity to have a new conversation with the landowners out and to understand the landscape. But it's also a more efficient way of looking at using state resources with using the auction method. And the other thing I think is just super exciting is the partnership. Like Conservancy's built a big collaboration here to build on, and so that is super valuable. And the ability in these drought emergencies to pull these, it's not easy to pull these people together and get them to cooperate and agree and to prioritize in the same way, but to be able to do it in a rapid fashion, to have the network of the landowners to get 120 bids in, like that's phenomenal. So I'm just really excited about it.
I just wanted to say too that I think that certainly success built upon last year, which was very rapid rollout, and obviously late in, I think, planning, at least for the planting season and so forth. I sit as a member of the Sacramento Groundwater Authority, which is areas just immediately to the east of, the legal delta and some project areas. And I've suggested to them that they ought to look at this as a model, as there's a lot of intention around land repurposing and so forth. But I use this as an example of where you have, willing farmers and agricultural operations to come forward. Obviously, there's dollars attached to it, so that may not be immediately available in some of the groundwater authorities, stable groundwater agencies. But as they're looking at doing things that will encourage better irrigation practices, saving water and not necessarily fallowing land, which can be a bit contentious with a lot of folks. And I think, some of the lands that, as you talk about flooding up, even in the Consumers Preserve where TNC is, that's right adjacent to where this groundwater authority, which is kind of on the eastern ridge of Sacramento County on up into Amador County and at the San Joaquin County line. So this is a great model. I've talked about some of the performance metrics, and again, you may get some inquiries if you haven't already, you and your staff. I know you're busy putting together this year's program, but I think to Sandy's point and what others, I'm sure, will weigh in with, this is I think a good example. Obviously, having the funding is advantageous, but I think how you may, structure this year, looking at this auction process and where you get the biggest bang for the buck, but then measuring the savings, which are certainly with the sustainable groundwater management is required. You got to show, how you achieve, the stabilization in those basins. I think, at least for those entities that are adjacent to the delta and what we're doing here at the Conservancy, could certainly benefit greatly from the experience here. And so I just wanted to compliment you, Campbell, but you may get, if you haven't already, get some inquiries because they're looking to maybe implement something along the lines, or at least draw from the experience here. And I think it's very valuable, but I can't say enough about the program and certainly the way you've been able to, and certainly all the partners, I know the Water Master and others were, called to the table. I kidded about seeing I get communication. There was the tail end of it. You folks were scrambling this year, obviously, getting a little more time.
Yeah.
And I think the benefits will be great, certainly during the drought, but I think long term, some of this will play itself out to be beneficial for many, many years to come. So
I appreciate you mentioning the monitoring too, because I didn't mention that in my report, but Rachel and the other agency partners have been really actively processing the data that's coming out of the initial program. And we'll continue to do that for the second round. There'll be reports out that'll be, widely available. And I do hope it's informative up and down the state, as well as just in the Delta in the future.
The report indicates that the water conserved is allocated to protecting Delta water quality. How does that work?
It's it's a challenge. I think the key there is that it's not recognized as available for export. It's not recognized as excess water and available for export. So, it's a relatively small amount of water, but at the right time that can have localized salinity impacts, which we're hoping for. But that's part of the pilot project is to.
I think I just want to weigh in again. When I came on the board, we were talking about the Conservancy being one of the facilitators on some of these overall conversations. And I think to have the staff really step up and the board really stretch to make that happen, I think has been really fruitful. And we're seeing some of those fruits now, but I think to use your words, Dawn, in decades beyond us, we'll see hopefully a better climate and restoration habitat in this whole region. So thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions or hands raised.
So just very quickly, you will be seeing a board packet relatively soon. Please lock in your November 16th at 9 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully we can move through quickly and hopefully make sure we'll do a poll to make sure we can get a quorum. But please keep an eye out for notices on that.
All right, thank you, sir. And next is our overview of nature-based solutions and Delta Subsidence carbon management.
Okay, that's me as well. And as threatened for a very long time, I'm going to provide an overview of our subsidence and carbon work. We've wanted to do this for a while, but it keeps getting pushed as a result of other priorities. But now really is the perfect time because, as I mentioned in the staff report, we now have $36 million specifically for these activities. And again, that's really in part support from the legislature, the administration, and resources agency in helping us make sure that money is in the budget. So thanks to everyone who helped us do that. So this really, this is part of a partnership that we have been a part of for a very long time, exploring the relationship between subsidence and greenhouse gas emissions in the Delta. And without patting ourselves on the back too much here, I would say that we have been sort of the unifying force in this partnership, keeping it aligned and moving forward. So just kind of an overview and kind of a reminder. I know we've talked about this. What we're really talking about here is the 200,000 acres that are really in the center of the Delta and the most deeply subsided lands. They're the most deeply subsided lands because they have the highest organic content. The peat soil has the most carbon in it. And these lands are 20 to 30 feet below sea level. So it's a huge hole in the ground that represents a threat to California's water supply, as well as all the agriculture and the communities that are in this area. So the mechanism of subsidence really is that these were all wetlands for eons, and that's what created the peat soil. When you drain those wetlands to be able to grow crops, you create oxidation. It's called microbial oxidation. The microbes have access to that carbon, and they get in there and they digest that peat, and their byproduct, their waste product, is carbon dioxide, which spins directly to the atmosphere. So these are fantastic agricultural lands. They're very productive, but simply by draining peat soils, you create this huge carbon emission into the atmosphere, and you create the subsidence. So one way to look at it is those great big holes in the ground out there were all carbon that is volatilized directly into the atmosphere. So, and again, this is not helping our climate situation. It's a huge, between 10 and 26 tons of carbon per acre per year are volatilizing out there. And then it's creates the risk of losing the Western Delta to an inland sea and affects the water supply of California, as well as the communities and the agriculture out there. So fortunately, there's a pretty easy fix. And that easy fix is you simply put water back on the landscape. That stops that ability for the microbes to do the oxidation, stops the subsidence, and stops the carbon emission. There's really two ways that you can do that. You can do rice cultivation. Rice is one of the few crops that actually grow with wet feet. And so that stops the subsidence and the carbon emission. Or you can do managed wetlands, which is simply impounding the water and allowing natural wetlands to sort of recolonize. There's about 8,000 acres in the Delta that's considered too wet to farm, and that number continues to grow. And that's where we've burned through the peat to the point that water from the surrounding area seeps through and creates areas that are just too wet to farm. It's too wet to grow a corn crop, but interestingly, it also swallows whole farm equipment. So farmers are out there with their tractors trying to plow the land. They literally sink. We have pictures of large pieces of equipment submerged in peat soil, the wet peat soil. So you have the option of taking land that's lost production already and then doing a managed wetland, and then the incentive really comes from a carbon protocol that we have gotten approved from the American Carbon Registry that allows a landowner to consider rice and or managed wetlands and then quantify their emission reduction, get that certified through a third party, and then take it to the carbon market and get a carbon revenue stream from the voluntary market. In the years that we've been working on this, we've seen the carbon values go from $7 a credit or ton to closer to 20. Right? Between 15 and 20 is where they are at on the voluntary market now. At those numbers, the value of carbon from managed wetlands is coming close to a lot of lease values in the Delta. So it's getting to where that incentive is really significant. And the incentive is a lesser amount, but it's an additional amount to rice cultivation, which is actually a higher commodity value than most of what's grown out there in this region of the Delta. So you see that the incentives are coming together, and as is just interest in general. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a shift where Delta landowners recognize in this region that subsidence is one of the biggest threats and one of their highest priorities to figure out how to deal with that. That makes sense, right? They wake up in the morning and their entire operations are 20 feet to 30 feet below the surrounding river level. But that's been a shift through time. And then, so as a result of all of this, we're seeing A lot of interest. So in the last several years, 1,700 acres of managed wetlands have gone into the Delta. There are 2 projects now that will realize an additional 2,000 acres of managed wetlands in the near term. Rice cultivation has increased about 1,500 acres in the last several years. But now, because of scarcity in the upper valley of water, as well as, an expectation of a more consistent water supply in the Delta, there's a lot of incentives to move rice into the Delta. And so we expect somewhere around 10,000 acres to be coming into the Delta in the relatively near term. So things are shifting. So the funding that we've gotten now is, we've been out talking to a lot of farmers and landowners for a long time, been preaching the gospel of managed wetlands and rice to stop subsidence, but we've never had any funding really to back that up and to be able to support their efforts to make these changes and realize these benefits. So this funding source is what we will do. We're actively working with a number of potential projects that would like to come in and provide applications, talking with different partners and aligning things. And I'm hopeful that we will see some proposals in the relatively near future. As I also mentioned earlier, back in January, you all approved a set of general grant guidelines that will cover this funding. Those were grant guidelines specifically for non-bond related general funds, and that's what this is. I did want to mention too that because these are general funds, there's a rapid turnaround. We have 3 years to obligate and 5 years to liquidate. So that puts us under some pressure to really move quickly. And some of these projects are fairly big and complex. But you all did approve a general grant guidelines. In the staff report, I said that we would be looking at a solicitation notice to bring for your consideration early next year. But given the urgency and given that we now have the expectation of a special meeting in November, we would like to bring to you all a solicitation notice as well as potentially some amendments to the grant guidelines that were approved in January. But bring that as a package so that we can post that on our website and open the solicitation and start to receive proposals. Solicitation notice will just be very specifically and quite succinctly talk about the types of projects, who's eligible, and make notice that the money is actually available and we're ready to accept applications. It is a non-competitive grant program similar to Prop 68 in the previous CAR, and we would receive applications and evaluate them on a continuous basis, and of course bring them staff recommendations to the board for consideration. So that is a general overview of what we've done, the fact that we now have funding, and where we hope to go. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
10:29, just so everyone knows.
We have some flexibility on that. Any
Yes,
thoughts or questions from anyone?
So are you imagining, so these practices are things that require both capital investment to make conversions on the property as well as payment on, like, ongoing for management? So are you imagining the grant program would pay for one or both of that, like which part of that, or is it both pieces of that?
I think we need to create as much flexibility as we can because across the types of projects that we're envisioning, there's a suite of ways that our funding can come in. So one way would be to actually help pay for easements. Another way would be to help pay for earth moving to actually isolate managed wetlands and provide water infrastructure. We have considered trying to establish a revolving loan fund because one of the things that the rice farmers really struggle with, I think the impediments to rice farming is the upfront cost of land leveling and water infrastructure. So we might try to establish a way that we could do a revolving loan fund. And again, we have to make sure that we are doing that through the reclamation districts because we will not be able to give these funds directly to private landowners. So there's a number of ways, and we'll want to create the solicitation in a way that can kind of accommodate all of those ways. But obviously, there's also constraints with what we can and can't do. And
Very exciting.
it is.
I know, I feel like this has been your baby for as long as I've known you. So congratulations.
I think, Les, you were.
So if this results in reduction in emissions and the generation of emission credits that go to market and revenue is generated from the sale of those emission credits in the cap and trade market, to whom does the revenue that is generated accrue? To the landowner?
The expectation is to the landowner. There may be some cost share splitting with a little bit. So there are companies out there that do the marketing.
Right.
And actually do the transaction. So part of that revenue could be, a small percentage could go to over their costs.
Okay.
But the majority, the expectation is that we're trying to actually get that revenue to the landowner as incentive to change.
And then how, in terms of the subsidy that the Conservancy would provide to the landowner from the 36 million, let's say, that the state has granted to the Conservancy, is there an offset? Does the Conservancy back out some of the money that you invested in the property so that you can invest it elsewhere and expand the utility of what the state is providing?
Yeah, in a perfect world, I think absolutely. The challenge here is that the incentive is just barely enough to cover lost ag revenue. So one way though that could work is if we are doing a revolving loan fund, when that money is paid back, that would just be a continual amount of money that we could just continue into the future.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Yes and no.
Yes,
depending on the condition.
Well, I'm very supportive of this, as you know. There is some possibility for, I think, participation by local government, maybe in matching. No, I don't know if there's any of these subsiding islands in Yolo County, but if there were, we're looking for projects through our climate commission. And I think all or most of the counties have passed emergency climate resolutions and are setting deadlines for reducing carbon. And this is an obvious candidate for reducing carbon in the counties. Cities and counties are possible partners in this.
Yes, it's an interesting dynamic. Once you get out of that deeply subsided zone, the numbers change drastically because of how organic. I think most of Yolo County is more in the mineral soils. So you have to be very careful that, particularly with wetlands, that your wetlands aren't producing enough methane to swamp the sequestration benefit. So that's a bit of a challenge. But I mean, our solicitation, I think, will say eligible for wetland projects that do provide climate benefit. So I think if, to the extent that they're on the edge in that subsided zone, or there are other things that we can demonstrate have climate benefit, they could be eligible. It'd be great to work. Thank you. I think Brian, you had a question.
No, I just wanted to make a comment. Really supportive of this and so excited that this is getting out the door so quickly, given that it's general fund and that general fund revenues are not what they were last year. So I really appreciate, the secretary is really pushing on all of us to get the large investments that we've gotten, thanks to the legislature and the governor over the last 2 years, just getting those out the door, and so that we can all see the difference that they can make, and seeing the Conservancy move this quickly, it's great. So great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to mention too, I know we actually have before the end of the calendar year, consideration for adoption of our climate action plan, and there's a fairly significant component in there for agricultural practices. Initially, they were taking a big chunk, but there is a significant part of that. Some of them relates to obviously uses of fertilizer and so forth. But I know some of these soils are certainly in lower sections of Sacramento County, and the state obviously owns significant portions of Twitchell and Sherman Islands, but they've already done some of these demonstration projects. I would just say that we have actually a person on point, staff person is our climate action manager, and if there's opportunity, sort of going, I assume you go through local farm bureaus and other sources for this, but I would just encourage our folks to, again, be in contact with your staff. This would be a rapid rollout, but I think there are some areas. I know TNC obviously has a presence, certainly with the talk about drought really previously, but with this carbon sequestration, there's some opportunities to work with some of the other local farming entities down in the lower portion of Sacramento County portion of Delta. Some of those islands obviously are already under state control, but
right.
Now, will the state be eligible to apply back for state funds to do this? Yeah, they will. Okay.
I think the only restriction, not the only restriction, I'm sure, but is mostly we just can't put it out to private landowners.
So you have to work through the
RDs or other.
And of course, some of those reclamation district, levy districts are state, it's a large part controlled by the state.
Looks like Supervisor Miller has her hand up.
Thank you. I just want to say this is a really great program. I'm so pleased to see that there's finally some funding attached for the conversion. Campbell, I still remember, what was it, 3 years ago now? You and I went out for a meeting with Dino Cortopassi, who really kind of pioneered this whole mix of managed wetlands and rice, and was just a huge proponent of this in the Delta. And of course, at the time, there wasn't funding for the conversion. And you took a huge amount of verbal abuse that day from Mr. Cortopassi, who could really dish it out. But I'm really pleased to see that there finally is recognition that this is a viable solution to a lot of the problems in the Delta, and there's funding attached to it. So I'm actually pleased that it's going to be, the requirement's going to be quick out the door. I think the sooner we start seeing more of these results and tracking this data, the more folks will realize what a really smart investment it is for California. So this is great.
Great, and thanks to the 5-County Coalition, I have a stack of support letters over the years. This has been a long time coming, but it's great. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Mike, Mike Moncrief?
Yeah, I was just making the connection to the public lands, state-owned lands for the funding. I think it will be difficult for many of the smaller reclamation districts to participate initially, but I think over time, there's a lot of great value in the program for private landowners. Rural LMAs have a hard time maintaining their levees, rehabbing their levees, let alone managing wetlands or other lands. So I think initially that focus with state-owned lands, public lands is going to be the focus, but hopefully in time develop to where RDs can take advantage and work with their landowners.
All right. Unless there's other questions, I think that brings us to a close on this one.
I think so. I think we're at discussing potential agenda items for the 25th of 2023.
All right. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll meet one time before that, November 16th at 9. And that we'll consider staff recommendations from the DRIP program, as well as a solicitation notice for the nature-based funding solution. And then on the 25th of January, we will bring our 2023 implementation plan for the board to consider. So that's our annual commitment to what we're going to do to meet the goals and objectives within our strategic plan relative to all the programs we're running. And then I believe we're hopeful that there will be a community enhancement grant program staff recommendations to consider.
You said November 16th at 9?
November 16th at 9, and then January 25th at 9 as well. And again, November 16th will be virtual. So we'll set it up to just be all virtual. And
I have January 26th.
oh, really?
Is it 25th?
The third Wednesday, fourth
Is
Wednesday.
it 25th?
It is 25?
Yeah.
Okay, it is the 25th.
I'll fix that.
Okay, that's the end of that item.
All right. Well, that brings us to one more shot at some public comment here. If there's anything else from the public or any board members for the good of the order. I don't see any. So that would bring us to adjournment and an awesome field trip. Everybody's going to head out and get to see some of what the Conservancy does in action. So thank you all for attending today. Stay safe on that journey and enjoy yourselves. Have fun. And I'll see you all November.
Great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.